The wall clock struck 7 in the morning, but I'd been awake for a long time. Outside my window, Hyattsville was slowly waking up, a light December snow covering the streets. I sat in the old chair Bruce had bought back in the 80s and stared at the picture on the mantelpiece. My husband and I, and little Laird at Crestwood Lake. Laird was 8 then, 39 years ago, and he was smiling so openly, so genuinely, looking at his father with adoration. Where and when did I lose that smile? My name is Moira Butterworth. I am 72 years old, and for the past 5 years I have lived alone in the house where Bruce and I lived for 46 years. After he died of a heart attack, it was as if our house had emptied out, not only because of my husband's absence, but because my son and daughter-in-law began to show up less and less often. I put the photograph aside and went into the kitchen to make tea. The old floorboards creaked beneath my feet, reminding me how many stories these walls held. Bruce had always said that a house, like a marriage, required constant attention. Something constantly needs fixing, touching up, painting, updating. Since his death, I've learned many things, replacing gaskets in faucets, fixing light switches, even using a drill. Laird had offered to help exactly once, 3 years ago, but he'd never come, citing an emergency. I made tea and sat down at the kitchen table. Christmas was 10 days away, which meant I had to decide what to do. Last year, I had mailed my son and daughter-in-law gifts of expensive cashmere sweaters. A thank you card arrived 3 weeks later, written in Heather's hand, not Laird's. This year, I wanted to change things up. "You expect too much from him," Enid, my best friend, told me when we met at Benny's Cafe last Thursday. Some kids just don't know how to be grateful. Enid knew what she was talking about. Her daughter had moved to Australia 10 years ago and only called it Christmas. "It's not about being grateful," I countered then. I just wanted to understand what I'd done wrong. I took a sip of my tea and grimaced as it went cold. The house was quiet, with only the ticking of the clock to remind me that time was ticking. 5 years since Bruce's death. 5 Christmases alone. When Bruce was alive, Christmas was always a special time. We would gather as a family, my husband and I, Laird, Heather and their children, Ashley and Noah, who are now 15 and 13. Bruce had a knack for creating holiday cheer, cooking a turkey from a family recipe, playing old Christmas records, and telling his grandchildren stories of his childhood. After his death, that tradition was discontinued. I spent that first Christmas in a daze of grief. Laird called in the morning, saying they were going to Heather's parents' house, but would be sure to stop by and see me in a couple days. They didn't. They spent the second Christmas at a ski resort, a gift from Laird's company for a successful construction contract. The third Christmas, they invited me to their place, but Heather was on the phone all evening discussing some kind of sale with a friend. The kids were on their tablets, and Laird was clearly annoyed by my presence. Last year, I decided not to impose myself and mailed the gifts. This year, I wanted to change things up. I was tired of being invisible, a shadow, a burden. Tired of pretending everything was fine when Laird cancelled appointments at the last minute or forgot to call me back. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Enid's number. "Moira, I'm calling to see how you're getting on with your Christmas plans," she said after the greetings. "I'm going to give it one last try," I replied, looking out the window at the falling snow. "I want to buy Laird that watch he was talking about when Bruce was alive." "A watch?" Enid sounded surprised. "The Patek Philippe one?" "Yes, that's the one. Bruce always said it was an investment, not just a purchase, that they could be passed down from generation to generation." "But they cost a fortune," Enid exclaimed. $90,000, I replied calmly. I have that money, Enid. Bruce has taken good care of me, and I've always been frugal. There was silence on the other end of the line. Are you sure this is a good idea? Enid finally asked. Such an expensive gift might look like an attempt to buy attention. I sighed. Maybe that's what it was. An attempt to buy something that should be given willingly, the love and attention of an only son. I just want us to have a family, I said. A real family, not this strained relationship. I'm 72, Enid. How long do I have left? 10 years? 15? I don't want to spend them alone. After talking to Enid, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Then I resolutely dialed the number of the estate jewelry store in downtown Hyattsville. I'd known the owner, Ernest Lloyd, for 40 years, back when Bruce had bought me an engagement ring. Mrs. Butterworth, Ernest greeted me when I walked into the store the next day. It's good to see you. Your order arrived this morning. He pulled an elegant box from the safe and opened it. Inside was a watch, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, with a white dial and a rose gold case. It was exactly the kind of watch Laird had dreamed of. It's gorgeous, I whispered, looking at the watch, which cost as much as a small house in Hyattsville. It's not just a clock, Mrs. Butterworth, Ernest said proudly. It's a work of art that will become a family heirloom. A family heirloom. Those words echoed in me. Bruce had always dreamed of having things that would be passed down from generation to generation. He himself grew up in a poor family where every dollar counted, and nothing was passed down except debts. When our business, a small accounting firm, began to generate a steady income, Bruce would say, "Moira, we're not just creating a fortune, we're creating a legacy." I paid for the watch and carefully took the box. Ernest had wrapped it in elegant gift wrap with a gold ribbon. You give a generous gift, he said as he walked me to the door. I hope the recipient will appreciate it. I hoped so too. At home, I put the box on the table and stared at it for a long time. Next to it, I put the Christmas card I had bought in advance. Of man. I rewrote the text a few times before I settled on the simple words, Dear Laird, this gift is not just a watch, but a remembrance of your father, who always wanted you to have a family heirloom. Love, Mum. That evening, I called Laird. Mum? He sounded surprised. I rarely called first, for fear of being intrusive. Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, I answered. I just wanted to know what you were doing for Christmas. Oh, that, he stammered. We haven't decided exactly. Heather wants to have a dinner for her co-workers, but it's not definite. Of us baking cookies together. I thought maybe I could stop by for a little while, bring some presents for the kids and you and Heather. Where has it all disappeared Pause again. To? But the most I don't know, Mum. We're all very busy with work before the holidays. Let me call you back next week, okay? When Bruce died, most of our savings had gone to me. Not next week. But there was also not 10 days later when Christmas was only 3 days away. There was still a house, I could have called myself, but something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe fear of another rejection. On December 23rd, I decided to act. I called Enid and told her that tomorrow, Christmas Eve, I would go to my son's house with presents. Are you sure? Bruce was always proud of you she for going me. Your own way. He hasn't called back. How my husband I'm his mother, Enid. Son's decision to I shouldn't have to wait for an invitation to see my own son on Christmas Eve. Yeah, Dad's always been I didn't supportive. Sleep well. Laird nodded, looking me in the eye for the first time all evening. Unlike some people. I froze with my fork in my hand. What do you mean? Nothing, Mum. He looked away. Let's just eat. After lunch, I pulled out the folder with the documents I'd prepared. I wanted to talk to you about the inheritance, I began. I'm 72 now and I need to be prepared for anything. Mum, Laird said with a wince. Let's not talk about such things. You'll outlive us all. I hope not, I smiled. Parents shouldn't bury their children, but that's not the point. I want you to know how the assets are distributed and what will be yours when I die. I showed him the documents, the will that listed him as the primary heir, the deeds to the house, the account statements. Laird looked through them with growing interest. These are all impressive, he said at last. I didn't realize you and your father had so much in savings. We've always been frugal, I said, and we invested wisely. Bruce wanted you and your children to be well off. Laird continued to study the papers, and I noticed the change in his face. His eyes glistened, he even licked his lips. It was like he was looking at gold bars instead of numbers on paper. And these shares, he pointed to one of the documents, are they still in your portfolio? Yes, of course. Bruce considered them a long-term investment. You know, Mum, Laird set the papers aside and looked at me with a smile I hadn't seen in years. You should come visit us more often. The kids miss you. This sudden change in his attitude made me wary. He'd barely agreed to this lunch this morning, and now suddenly he was saying the kids miss you? The same kids who barely looked at me at my birthday party? Really? I asked, not hiding my surprise. I'd love to, but I'm afraid of being intrusive. You have your own life. It's silly, Laird said. You're family, and family's supposed to stick together. After that conversation, Laird started calling more often. He inquired about my health, asked if I needed help with the house. He even offered to come over and fix the porch, which really needed fixing. I rejoiced at the change, but something inside me remained wary. Enid, who I told about it, only shook her head. I hate to break it to you, Moira, but did this happen right after he found out about the money? Yes, but maybe he just realized that life was short and decided to mend his ways. Maybe, Enid agreed, but there was doubt in her voice. In October, Laird invited me to a family dinner. I showed up with pie and gifts for the grandchildren books I knew they liked. Heather greeted me with a strained smile. How nice of you to come, Moira, she said, taking the pie. But you needn't have bothered. We already have dessert. Dinner passed in a strange atmosphere. Laird was unusually attentive, constantly tucking into my food and asking my opinion on all sorts of things. Heather, on the other hand, barely concealed her irritation. The children were polite but distant, as if they were talking to a distant relative rather than a grandmother. After dinner, when the kids had gone to their rooms and Heather had gone to the kitchen, Laird came over to me on the couch. Mom, I wanted to consult with you, he began. I have an opportunity to expand my business, to take a big contract to build a cottage community. But that would require investment. Investments? I questioned. Yes, start-up capital, Laird explained. The bank gives a loan, but it requires a down payment of $200,000. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue, even though I knew where he was going. I thought maybe you could help. Laird looked at me hopefully. It's a great investment. It'll pay for itself in a couple years. And it's for the family, for Ashley and Noah's future. That's what it is. That's why he's suddenly so attentive. Not because he missed his mother, but because he needed the money. I'd have to think about it, I said, feeling my insides tighten. It's a lot of money. Sure, think about it. Laird patted my arm, but not for too long. The offer is for a limited time. As I left, he hugged me for the first time in months and said, I know you'll support me, Mum. You always have. At home, I couldn't sleep. I rolled around in bed, remembering the look on Laird's face when he talked about the money and the cold look on Heather's face. The next day, I called Talbot Prescott, Bruce and I's longtime friend and attorney. We met in his office, a small but cozy space in an old building in downtown Hyattsville. What's bothering you, Moira? Talbot asked as we sat down in the chairs by his desk. I told him about Laird's request and my doubts. $200,000 is a lot of money, Talbot said, adjusting his glasses. Are you sure the project really exists? What do you mean? I've known your son for a long time, Moira. Talbot sighed. And unfortunately, I know about a few of his failed business endeavours that you may not be aware of. He told me about Laird being on the verge of bankruptcy twice already, that the only way his company stays afloat is because of Heather's connections in the construction industry, that they're in a lot of debt. Why hadn't Bruce told me anything? I asked, feeling the ground slipping from under my feet. He wanted to protect you, Talbot said softly, and hoped Laird could handle it on his own. I walked out of Talbot's office with a heavy heart. Everything fell into place. The Laird's sudden attention, the strained atmosphere in their house, and Heather's hints that I shouldn't come over too often. They didn't want me. They didn't want my company. They didn't want my love. They wanted my money. For 2 weeks I avoided Laird's calls, saying I wasn't well. Finally, in early November, he came himself, for the first time in many months. "Mum, I've been worried," he said as he entered the house. "You're not answering the phone." "I'm just tired," I replied. My health isn't what it used to be at my age. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Laird was looking around the house as if assessing its value. "Have you decided about the investment?" he finally asked. "I spoke to Talbot," I said bluntly. "He told me about the state of your business." Laird's face changed. The mask of the caring son fell away, and I saw cold, calculating eyes. "Talbot doesn't understand anything about the construction business," he said. "Yes, we've had our difficulties, but this contract will change everything." "I can't give you that money, Laird," I said firmly. "Can't or won't?" His voice became hard. "You have that money, I've seen the statements. You just don't want to help your own son." "That's not the point," I started, but he interrupted. "Then what is it? What are you saving for? You're 72, Mum. How long do you have left? 5 years? 10? I have a family, children, a future." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where was the boy who used to bring me flowers from the neighbour's meadow? Who cried when he broke his knee and only my arms could comfort him? "I'll help you, but not like this," I said, trying to stay calm. "We can discuss other options with Talbot. Maybe a low-interest loan." "A loan?" Laird laughed bitterly. "From his own mother? I asked for help and you offer me a loan?" He stood up, pushing his chair back with a clatter. "You know what? Forget it. I'll manage on my own, like always." "Laird, please." I stood up too. "Let's talk calmly." "There's nothing to talk about." He's headed for the door. "You've made it clear that you don't care about me or my family." He left, slamming the door so hard the glass shook. I slumped back in my chair, feeling something inside finally break. After that conversation, Laird stopped calling. November passed in silence. I sent Thanksgiving cards to my grandchildren, but received no response. In early December, I called Heather, hoping to at least find out how the kids were doing. She answered dryly, saying everyone was busy preparing for the holidays, and quickly ended the call. And now, looking at the road leading to my son's house, I couldn't escape the thought that all the signs had been in front of me all along. I just refused to see them. Enid was right. Some kids just don't know how to be grateful, and some parents refuse to see the truth for too long, clinging to the illusion of family happiness. But this Christmas Eve, I still had hope. I hoped that an expensive gift would open my son's heart, that the watch he'd dreamed of for years would become a symbol of reconciliation. I was ready to forgive and forget, to start over. After all, what did I have left but family? I didn't know then how deeply wrong I was. The snow intensified as I drove up to the Laird's house, a modern 2-story building in an upscale neighbourhood in Hyattsville. Too big, in my opinion, for a family of 4, with columns at the entrance and huge windows. Bruce always said a real home is a place that's cosy, not something that impresses the neighbours. But Laird apparently held a different opinion. I parked my old Volvo between Heather's brand new SUV and a sports car I hadn't seen before. Maybe they had company. The thought made me uncomfortable. I hadn't planned on intruding on a family celebration. With hands shaking with cold and excitement, I pulled gift bags out of the trunk. The most important gift, the watch for Laird, was in my bag. I didn't want it to freeze in the cold. As I approached the front door, I noticed how beautifully decorated the house was. Garlands wrapped around the porch railing and lights twinkled in the windows. I remembered how Bruce wanted, Heather interrupted, to show what a generous and caring mother you are. But if you really cared about Laird, you would have helped him with his business instead of spending money on meaningless gifts. These gifts aren't pointless, I said, pointing to the watch box. This? It doesn't matter what it is, Laird said. We don't need your handouts. And before I could say anything, he slammed the door in my face. I stood on the porch, still holding the gifts, stunned and humiliated. The cold wind chilled me to the bone, snow falling on my shoulders and the packages in my hands. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had been chased away like an unwanted guest, like a beggar. Me, his mother. With difficulty, as if in a dream, I walked down the porch steps and walked to the car. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to open the door and put the gifts on the passenger seat. The box of watches, a $90,000 watch, fell to the floor of the car. But I didn't even try to pick it up. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, just looking at the house where my son and his family lived. Warm light poured in from the windows, laughter resounded inside. They continued to celebrate as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just put a 72-year-old woman out in the cold, their mother and grandmother. I don't know how long I sat like that, stunned and frozen. Finally, I started the engine and turned on the heat. I had to go. But where to? Home, to an empty house where no one was waiting for me? I remembered the words of Talbot Prescott, Bruce's longtime friend and lawyer. You can always count on me, Moira. Maybe right now, I needed a friend who would listen and understand. I pulled into the driveway and headed toward the Talbot house. The decision that had been brewing inside me for a long time was now finalized. Enough. No more humiliation, no more hoping, no more trying to buy a love that doesn't exist. Talbot lived in a small but well-kept mansion on a quiet street. There were lights in the windows, and when I rang the bell, the door opened almost immediately. Moira? Talbot looked at me in surprise. What's wrong? I'm sorry to intrude, I said, trying to hold back tears. Can I come in? Of course, of course. He stepped back, letting me into the house. I was just about to have dinner. Would you like to join me? His living room was warm and cozy. The Christmas tree in the corner flickered modestly, and 2 candles and a bottle of wine stood on the table. Are you expecting guests? I asked, noticing the 2 glasses. No, he smiled embarrassedly. Just an old habit. I always put 2 on, even though I've lived alone for 10 years, ever since Eleanor died. I knew his wife had passed away from cancer. He and Bruce had often talked about it, about how hard it was to lose a loved one. I understood them both all too well now. Tell me, Talbot said, as we sat down at the table and he poured me some wine. What happened? And I did the watch. The visit to Laird's, the way he had left me standing in the cold, his cruel words. I'm sorry, Moira, Talbot said when I had finished. His eyes behind the glasses were full of sympathy. But I'm not surprised, I admit. Laird has always been a complicated man. Not always, I countered. Once he was just a boy who loved his parents. People change, Talbot sighed. Sometimes not for the better. We sat in silence, sipping our wine. Snow was falling outside the window, covering the world in a white shroud. Christmas, a time of miracles and family reunions. It's ironic. I want to change my will, I said suddenly. Talbot looked at me in surprise. Are you sure? It's a big decision, especially at such an emotional time. I've never been so sure, I replied firmly. I don't want Laird to get any of my property, not a dime. What about grandchildren? I wondered. Ashley and Noah were just children. They weren't to blame for their parents' actions, but I also knew that if I left them an inheritance, Laird and Heather would find a way to gain control of it. I'll set up an educational trust fund for them, I decided. Money that could only be used for tuition, but the bulk of it, I want to leave it to charity. Talbot nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Moira, I must make sure you make this decision with a clear head. Tomorrow, when your emotions subside, you might regret it. No, I shook my head. I won't regret it. Today I saw the true face of my son. He left me standing in the cold with a $90,000 gift in my hands. He yelled at me, "Why did you come? You're not welcome!" and slammed the door in my face. I looked Talbot straight in the eye. I don't want him to get after my death what he longed for in my lifetime. Talbot looked at me in silence, then nodded. Good. We can meet in my office tomorrow morning. I'll get the paperwork ready. Thank you. I felt suddenly relieved, as if the weight I'd been carrying for years was finally starting to lift off my shoulders. We finished dinner, and Talbot offered to stay at his place. The weather had turned bad and the roads were dangerous. But I declined. I needed to get home, back inside my walls, to deal with what had happened. By the time I drove up to the house, the snow had almost stopped. The moon peeked out from behind the clouds, illuminating my old two-story house with a silvery light. It looked lonely, yet majestic, like myself. Upon entering the house, the first thing I did was turn on the lights in all the rooms. No darkness, no self-pity. I pulled the watch box out of my bag and opened it carefully. The clock was intact. It ticked quietly, counting down the seconds of my new life. I put it on the mantelpiece next to a picture of Bruce. He was looking at me from the picture, and I felt like he approved of my decision. You always said that a watch was an investment in the future, I said aloud, that it could be passed down from generation to generation. But apparently in our case, generations ended at Laird. I took off my coat, turned on the kettle and pulled out my phone. It was time to call Enid and tell her what had happened. Then I'd call a charity I'd been thinking about for a long time, one that helped elderly people without family support. I knew how important it was, how many women and men just like me spend the holidays alone, abandoned by their children. The phone rang before I could dial Enid's number. Laird's name popped up on the screen. I stared at the phone, not knowing what to do. Part of me, the old part of me, that was used to forgiving and forgetting, wanted to answer it, but the other part, the part that was born tonight on the snowy porch of my son's house, knew this call wasn't about remorse. It was to find out about the watch, about its value. And now he's calling not because he regrets the words he said, but because he realized how much money he just rejected. I muted the sound and put the phone screen down. Tomorrow I'll meet with Talbot and change my will. And then I'll start a new life, without illusions, but also without the weight of unfulfilled hopes. The kettle boiled, filling the kitchen with warm steam. I made tea and sat by the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard. Somewhere in the distance I could hear bells ringing. St. Michael's Church was celebrating Christmas. I felt no holiday cheer, but a strange calmness enveloped me. I had survived the worst, and had endured. The phone rang again, but I didn't look at the screen. Whatever his words were now, they couldn't change what had happened. You can't take back the cruel words. You can't erase the moment when your only son yells at you, "Why did you come? You're not welcome," and slams the door in your face. Some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal, and I knew that this wound would be with me for the rest of my days. But I also knew I would survive it. I survived Bruce's death. I survived the years of my son's gradual estrangement. I would survive this, too. The phone went silent, and then it rang again, and again, and again. Laird was persistent, I'll give him that, but I was determined. Tomorrow I'm going to see Talbot, and I'm going to change everything. He'll know he's lost not only his mother, but the inheritance he'd been counting on. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day. The first day of my new life. Christmas morning greeted me with silence and bright sunlight reflecting off the snow. I woke up early, as I always do, but for the first time in years I felt neither the joyful excitement nor the bitterness of loneliness. There was a strange emptiness inside, as if yesterday's events had washed away all emotion, leaving only determination. I showered, dressed carefully the dark blue suit Bruce had always thought elegant, the pearl earrings he'd given me for my 30th wedding anniversary. Today I wasn't a grief-stricken mother. I was a businesswoman going to an important meeting. Before I left, I checked the cell phone I had turned off last night. 26 missed calls from Laird and 5 texts. I didn't bother listening to or reading them. What was the point? Now I saw the true face of my son, a greedy, selfish man who only valued what I could give him. It was drizzly outside, but sunny. Hyattsville looked like a Christmas card. Snow-covered roofs, children playing snowballs in the yards, garlands on the trees. Normally, such a sight would fill me with warmth. But today I looked at this Christmas splendor aloofly, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. Talbot's office was in an old building downtown. It was usually closed on Christmas morning, but Talbot made an exception for me. When I walked in, he was already waiting, wearing glasses, with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers on his desk. "Merry Christmas, Moira," he said, coming up to meet me. "Did you sleep well?" "Good enough," I answered, taking off my coat. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me today." "I'm always on call for you and Bruce, you know," he smiled. I went to the window and peered out cautiously, and there was Laird standing on the porch. His face was red, either from frost or anger, and he had a crumpled hat in his hands. I didn't answer the door. He rang a few more times, and then he started banging on the door. "Mom," he shouted. "I know you're home. Open up." I sat in the chair, not moving, as if I could become invisible. 20 minutes later, he left, but soon returned. Heather was with him this time. They were both calling and knocking, Heather yelling something about unacceptable behavior and ingratitude. I watched them through a crack in the curtains and felt nothing but tiredness. How quickly their tone had changed. Yesterday, I had been an unwelcome guest left freezing on their doorstep, and today they were demanding my attention. By 3 p.m. they finally left, but the calls continued. The phone flashed like Christmas lights. 35, 40, 45 missed calls. At 4 o'clock, Enid called. "Moira, are you all right?" she asked excitedly. "Laird called me asking if you were at my place." "I'm at home," I replied. "I just don't want to talk to him." "He said there was some kind of misunderstanding," Enid continued. "That you had a fight last night and he wanted to apologize." "A misunderstanding?" I grinned bitterly. "He left me standing out in the cold with presents in my hands, shouted that I wasn't welcome, and slammed the door in my face. And that's what he calls a misunderstanding?" Enid was silent for a moment. "He says he found out about the watch," she said at last, "about how much it was worth. He says he didn't realize." "Of course he didn't realize," I interrupted. "He wouldn't even look at the gift. He just sent me away like a beggar." "He's been trying very hard to get in touch with you," Enid said. "Maybe I should listen. He's not trying to contact me because he regrets what he said," I said firmly. "It's because he found out I changed my will." "You what?" Enid exclaimed. "When?" "This morning," I answered. "I met with Talbot. And Laird already knows." Enid sounded surprised. "How?" "I have no idea. Maybe Talbot told someone who told someone else. You know how fast news travels in Hyattsville." Enid sighed. "Well, that would explain his panic. He's called me 3 times in the last hour." "And what did you tell him?" "That I hadn't seen you or talked to you," Enid replied. "I wasn't going to lie to him, Moira, but I don't want to interfere with your relationship either." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "You're a true friend." After talking to Enid, I decided to check my email. There were 5 messages from Laird, all labelled urgent. I didn't bother opening them. Instead, I wrote an email to the director of a local animal shelter I met at a fundraiser a couple years ago. I asked if they needed volunteers. I suddenly wanted to do something useful, something that would give my life meaning beyond endlessly trying to earn the love of my ungrateful son. By 5 p.m., the number of missed calls from Laird had reached 60. I started cooking dinner just to keep my hands busy and take my mind off the blinking phone. I baked a chicken breast with herbs, made rice and a vegetable salad. Set the table with a nice tablecloth. Got some nice dishes. Today, I dined not like a lonely old woman, but like a woman who values herself and her life. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. This time it was not Laird, but Talbot. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said when I opened the door. "But I thought you might need some support." "Come on in." I stepped back, letting him into the house. "I was just about to have dinner. You want to join me?" We sat at the table eating baked chicken and talking about all sorts of things. The new book we'd both read recently, the plans the mayor's office had for redeveloping Central Park, the trip Talbot had planned for the spring. "Laird came to see me today," Talbot said as we moved on to dessert, the apple pie I'd baked yesterday for my son's family. "What did he want?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "To find out if it was true that you'd changed your will." Talbot sipped his tea. "I confirmed that I acted on your instructions." "How did he react?" "At first he didn't believe me, then he got angry. Shouted that you couldn't do that he was your only son, that it was unfair." Talbot wrinkled his nose. Then he threatened to sue, said something about incapacity and pressure from me. "He accused you of manipulating me?" I felt anger rising inside. "Something like that." Talbot nodded. "But don't worry, Moira. All the paperwork is in order. There are witnesses. Your capacity is unquestionable. There's nothing he can do." "It's ironic," I grinned bitterly. "Yesterday he kicked me out of his house, and today he's trying to prove that I'm out of my mind because I disinherited him." "Money changes people," Talbot sighed. "Or rather, it shows their true colours." After dinner, Talbot left, but offered to call me any time if I needed help. I thanked him for his support and closed the door feeling strangely calm. It was as if the storm that had been raging inside me for years had finally subsided. The phone kept ringing. 65, 70, 75 missed calls. I turned on the radio so I couldn't hear the vibrations. Christmas tunes poured out of the speaker. Silent Night, Jingle Bells, Let It Snow. Songs that usually filled me with warmth and nostalgia, but now sounded like the soundtrack to someone else's life. At 9 p.m., the phone rang again. 77 missed calls from Laird. I stared at the blinking screen and thought about how many times over the years I'd called my son myself, hoping to hear his voice, to invite him to dinner, to ask about his grandchildren. How many times he didn't answer or just gave me a short answer. Now he couldn't stop calling me every 15 minutes. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to listen to at least one of his messages. I chose the last one, left 10 minutes ago. "Mum, please call me back." Laird's voice sounded both angry and desperate. "This is kind of crazy. We can talk this out like adults. I realise I was wrong yesterday, but you're good too. Showing up uninvited when we had guests. That's no reason to break up a family. Talbot says you changed your will. Is that true? You can't do this to me, your only son. Call me back immediately." Not a word of apology, no admission of guilt, just accusations and demands. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. It was clear as day. Laird was not concerned about my state of mind, not about our relationship, but only about the money he expected to receive after my death. I sat in the living room, looking at the Patek Philippe watch on the mantelpiece, $90,000. A sum that could change the lives of many people. A sum I'd spent in hopes of buying my son's love. How naive I was. The phone rang again, but I didn't look at the screen. Instead, I pulled out the photo album and began flipping through the pages, looking at snapshots of our family, the young Bruce and I. Little Laird, our trips and holidays together. Happy moments that now seemed like snapshots from someone else's life. On one of the last pages, I found a picture I didn't remember. Bruce in the garden, pruning roses. He was looking at the camera with a slight smile, sun bunnies dancing in his eyes. I couldn't remember when I'd taken that picture, but it smelled so calm, so confident. "What would you do if you were me, Bruce?" I asked aloud, looking at the picture, and I could almost hear his answer. The same thing you would do, Moira. Would have protected my dignity. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. Then I went to the phone, which started ringing again, and turned it off completely. That was enough. No more calls, no more texts, no more trying to get through to me. Laird had made his choice yesterday when he left me standing out in the cold. I made mine today when I changed my will. Now we both have to live with the consequences of our decisions. I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd once shared with Bruce. I took off my earrings, brushed my hair, put on my nightgown. The usual evening rituals that seemed special tonight, the first steps in my new life. Before I went to bed, I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. It was snowing outside again, covering the world with a white blanket, hiding the traces of the previous day. Tomorrow would be a new morning, clean and fresh like this snow. I didn't know what the future would bring. I didn't know if I would ever see my grandchildren again, if I would ever reconcile with my son. But for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my life, that I was making decisions not out of fear of loneliness or desperate hope for love, but out of respect for myself and my values. 77 missed calls, 77 attempts by Laird to contact me, not out of concern or remorse, but out of fear of losing money. It was painful to realise, but liberating at the same time. Now I knew exactly who my son was, and I could stop fooling myself, stop hoping for something that would never happen. I lay in bed and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would be a new day. And I would meet it as a woman who had finally found freedom from illusions and the strength to defend her dignity. January was always a dreary month in Hyattsville. After the Christmas decorations and garlands, the town seemed grey and desolate. Of our relationship, and I want no part of it. Okay, Talbot continued to write. What about the grandchildren? It was a painful question. Ashley and Noah weren't to blame for their parents' actions, but I doubted Laird and Heather would let me see them after everything that had happened. Write that the Education Trust Fund is still in effect for them, I said after a pause, and that I'd be happy to see them if they wanted to see me when they were older. We went over the text of the letter for another hour or so, choosing each word carefully. I wanted it to be clear but not cruel, firm but not vindictive. When Talbot read out the final draft, I nodded. Yes, that's it. When can you send it? I'll have it delivered today, Talbot replied. In person. Thank you. I felt a strange calm grow inside me. You know, I thought I'd feel terrible about breaking up with my only son. But now I feel like I'm finally doing what I should have done a long time ago. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that bring the most relief, Talbot said. What do you plan to do next, Moira? I smiled, genuinely and freely for the first time in days. Live, Talbot. Just live. For myself, not for others. Back home, I pulled out the big map of the world that Bruce had hung in the study years ago. We had always dreamed of travelling after retirement, but his illness and death had ruined those plans. Now I decided to fulfill our dream on my own. I marked the places I wanted to visit with coloured buttons: Rome with its ancient ruins, Paris with its cosy cafes, Kyoto with its mysterious temples, New Orleans with its jazz. The budget I had previously set aside for gifts for Laird and his family could now be spent on these trips. The day after I sent the letter, the phone didn't ring once. I knew it was the calm before the storm, but I enjoyed the quiet as I planned my first trip. To Italy. In the spring, when the orange trees would bloom. 2 days later, the storm broke. Laird arrived unannounced, pounding on the door so hard that the neighbours started looking out the windows. "Mama!" he shouted. "I know you're home. Open up right now." I didn't. I sat in the chair with my book as if nothing had happened. He left an hour later but came back tonight, this time with Heather. They were both yelling, threatening to call the police, saying I was crazy. I called Talbot, and he arrived 15 minutes later. I watched from the window as he spoke calmly to Laird and Heather, showing them some papers. Laird was shouting, waving his arms around, Heather standing next to him with an expression of icy fury on her face. Finally, they got into the car and drove off. "What did you say to them?" I asked as I let Talbot into the house. That I have a restraining order against them coming near your house if they keep this up, he replied, taking off his coat. It was a bluff, of course, but it worked. Thank you. I squeezed his hand gratefully. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what friends are for, he smiled. But Moira, they won't give up so easily. Be prepared for them to try other ways to get through to you. I nodded, realizing that this was only the beginning of a long fight, but I was ready for her. No more compromises, no more giving in for the illusion of marital happiness. In February, I decided to tackle the house not to sell it, as Laird had suggested a few years ago, but to make it even more cosy for myself. I hired a construction crew to repair the porch and replace the old roof, ordered new furniture for the living room, and repainted the bedroom walls in the light blue colour I'd always liked, but which Bruce thought was too cold. Enid helped me choose fabrics for new curtains and bedspreads. We spent evenings over a cup of tea discussing patterns and colours like teenage girls planning a room makeover. You've changed, Moira? Enid remarked one day as we were looking at wallpaper samples. More freer. I feel freer, I agreed. It's like I've lost the weight I've been carrying around for years. What about Laird? Is he still trying to contact you? He gets a letter every week, I shrugged. I don't read them. I just put them in my desk drawer. Maybe someday when the pain subsides, I'll look through them. And the grandchildren? Enid asked cautiously. Do you miss them? Of course I miss them, I sighed. But they're not little kids anymore. Ashley will be 16 soon, Noah 14. They can decide for themselves if they want to see their grandmother. In March, I started volunteering at the local animal shelter. 3 times a week, I went there to walk the dogs, clean the cages, and feed the cats. The simple physical work and the unconditional love of the animals was strangely satisfying. It was there that I met Pearl, an old one-eyed cat who had been abandoned by her owners when they moved to another town. Pearl was grouchy and untrusting, never letting anyone pet her. But for some reason she chose me, jumping on my lap when I sat down to rest and purring loudly. She's never behaved like that with anyone, the shelter director marvelled. She must have sensed a kindred spirit in you. In April, I took Pearl home. It was the first time in my life I had a pet. Bruce was allergic, and after his death I hadn't thought about the possibility. But the old cat turned out to be the perfect companion. Independent but affectionate, not requiring constant attention, but always ready to keep me company in the long evenings. In May, I went on my first trip, to Italy, as I had planned. For 2 weeks, I wandered through the narrow streets of Rome and Florence, sat in small cafes. I go to college and live on my own. We can go out. I'm keeping the bracelet you gave me for my birthday. Love, Ashley. I reread the letter over and over again, feeling tears come to my eyes. Not all is lost, I thought. Maybe not now, but someday I will be able to be a part of my grandchildren's lives again. Not as a grandma with money, but simply as a person who loves them. In the fall, I went on a Mediterranean cruise with a group of retirees from Hyattsville. Before, I would never have dared to do such a thing. Bruce didn't like the sea, and after his death, I was afraid to travel alone. But now, buoyed by the success of the Italian trip, I felt brave enough for a new adventure. I met some interesting people on the ship. A former teacher from Oregon, a widowed architect from Chicago, a married couple from Toronto who had been traveling the world for 10 years. We played cards in the evenings, took harbour tours, shared stories of our lives. None of them knew about my drama with Laird, and I didn't tell. For the first time in a long time, I was just Moira, not the poor mother whose son turned his back on her. In November, when I returned from the cruise, Talbot invited me to dinner. We'd met often in recent months, either over a cup of tea in a cafe or in my garden, discussing new varieties of herbs. But this invitation was special. Talbot had made a reservation at the most expensive restaurant in Hyattsville. What are we celebrating? I asked when the waiter brought the champagne. Anniversary, Talbot answered, raising his glass. Exactly 1 year ago, you made a life-changing decision. And I have to say, It changed it for the better. I blinked in surprise. Indeed, it had been exactly a year since the day I'd decided to change my will and send Laird a formal letter through a lawyer. A year since my new life had begun. To new beginnings, I raised my glass. And here's to loyal friends who support me in times of need. After dinner, Talbot walked me home. We stood on the porch, the same one I'd repaired in the spring, and talked about my plans for the winter. I was going to go to New Orleans for Christmas, so I wouldn't have to spend the holiday in Hyattsville, where every corner reminded me of last year's humiliation. You know, Moira, Talbot said suddenly, looking me in the eye. I could go with you, if you don't mind the company, of course. I saw more than friendly concern in his gaze, warmth, hope, maybe even something akin to love. And to my surprise, I felt my heart respond to that warmth. I'd be glad to, I said quietly. I'd be glad. He smiled and took my hand gently. We stood like that for a while, not saying a word, just savouring the moment of intimacy and understanding. A week after that dinner, when the first snow blanketed Hyattsville in white, I saw Laird at the supermarket. He was standing at a shelf of canned goods, studying the prices, and he didn't notice me. I could have walked away unnoticed, but I decided to approach. Hello, Laird, I said quietly. He flinched and turned around. His face flashed with surprise, then wariness, and finally something like shame. Mom, he said uncertainly, how are you? Good, I smiled. Very good. How are you? How are the kids? They're fine, he shrugged. Ashley's going to college next year. She wants to study art. She's always been good at drawing, I said. Tell her congratulations. An awkward pause hung between us. I could see Laird struggling with himself. Proudness wouldn't let him apologise. But something in him, maybe a remnant of conscience, wouldn't let him just walk away. I hear you've been travelling a lot, he said finally. Yeah, I was in Italy in the spring, on a cruise in the fall, going to New Orleans for Christmas. By yourself? With a friend. I didn't bother to specify that the friend was Talbot, and that our relationship had grown beyond mere friendship. Laird nodded, shifting from foot to foot. I was thinking, maybe we could talk, sometime, about what happened. A year ago, those words would have made my heart beat faster with hope, but now I just looked at my son, the man who had caused me so much pain, and felt only a quiet detachment. I don't think that's necessary, Laird, I said softly. It's all said and done. I live my life, you live yours. It's best for everyone. But you're my mother, he said, a note of desperation in his voice. We can't just stop being a family. We stopped being a family the moment you left me standing out in the cold on Christmas Eve and yelled that I wasn't welcome, I said, and there was no bitterness in my voice, just a statement of fact. Family isn't just blood ties, Laird, it's mutual respect, caring, love, all of that is long gone between us. I can change, he said, and I could almost believe he meant it, almost. People don't change, Laird, I shook my head, at least not for that reason. You want to get back in touch with me not because you miss me or regret your actions, but because you hope I'll change my mind about the will. His face twitched, and I realised I'd hit the mark. Goodbye, Laird. I turned to leave. I wish you well, I really do, but our paths have parted and it's best for both of us. I walked away feeling his gaze on my back, but I didn't look back. There was no bitterness or regret in my heart, just the quiet certainty that I was doing the right thing. Pearl was waiting for me at home. She met me at the door and jumped into my arms, purring loudly. I took off my coat, made tea, and sat in a chair by the window, watching the snow fall. Talbot was due in an hour. We planned to discuss the details of the trip to New Orleans. Then I was going to call Enid, who'd just returned from visiting her daughter in Australia. And the animal shelter was waiting for me this weekend. I promised to help organise a Christmas fair to raise funds. My life was busy, interesting, full of plans and hopes. I was finally living for myself, not for others. And that was the best gift I could give myself. Meeting Laird at the supermarket proved that I was truly cured of my illusions. His words hadn't stirred up any hope or bitterness in me, just the quiet realization that some relationships were better left in the past. A year ago, I'd stood on his doorstep with an expensive gift in my hands, shivering with cold and humiliation. Today, I sat in my cozy home, surrounded by things I loved, with plans for a future I had chosen for myself. It was a long journey from despair to freedom, from trying to buy love to realizing my own worth, but every step of that journey was worth the trials I'd gone through. But as a symbol of my liberation, each tick counted down the seconds of my new life, a life in which I was no longer hostage to other people's expectations and demands. Pearl meowed softly, as if agreeing with my thoughts. I stroked her head, feeling the soft fur under my fingers and the warm, living warmth. "We did it, didn't we?" I asked the cat, and she blinked her one eye as if to say, "Yes, we did." And it was the truth. I did. I survived the betrayal of my only son, overcame the pain and humiliation, and found the strength to start a new life at 72. And this new life was much better than I could have imagined. The doorbell rang. Talbot came in, precise as always. I smiled, walking up to meet him. There were many more roads ahead of me that I wanted to travel.